Get your hands off her right now. The decorated Air Force colonel no one recognized on Flight 2247. The flight from Dallas to New York was supposed to be routine. Gate B12 at Dallas. Fort Worth International was packed with the usual Tuesday afternoon crowd, business travelers scrolling through emails, families wrestling with oversized carry-ons, college kids with headphones bigger than their patience. The terminal smelled like fast food and recycled air, and the departure board was already showing a 15-minute delay for Flight 2247. Nobody seemed surprised. Nobody ever is. Sarah Callahan was doing her best to hold herself together. She was 34 years old, a single mother from Fort Worth, Texas, and she hadn't slept properly in 3 days. Her daughter, Lily, was 6 years old and already half asleep against her shoulder before they'd even cleared the security checkpoint. Sarah had one rolling suitcase, one backpack overflowing with coloring books and juice boxes and a worn stuffed rabbit named Gerald, and exactly $47 left in her checking account after buying these tickets. She had put them on a credit card she'd been trying to pay down for 2 years. She was flying to New York because her mother had just had a stroke. There was no one else to go. Her ex-husband was out of the picture, had been for 4 years, since Lily was 2. Her brother lived in London and couldn't get a flight until Thursday at the earliest. Her friends back in Fort Worth had offered what they could: a casserole, a prayer chain, someone to water her plants. But none of them could take the week off work that she was now facing either. So Sarah had packed in 40 minutes, called her neighbor to watch the cat, and driven to the airport with Lily in the back seat asking quiet, careful questions about Grandma that Sarah didn't know how to answer. Is Grandma going to be okay? I hope so, baby. Are you scared? A longer pause than there should have been. A little, but it's going to be okay. She found their seats, 18B and 18C, middle and window, and carefully buckled Lily in before arranging their bags in the overhead compartment. The plane was a standard narrow body, 2 seats on the left and 3 on the right. Economy. The kind of flight where you feel every inch of the person next to you. She sat down, exhaled slowly, and looked out the window at the tarmac. Just get there, and everything else will figure itself out. The man settled into 18A before she fully registered he was there. He was somewhere in his late 50s, heavy-set, with the kind of face that had probably been handsome 20 years and 30 pounds ago. He wore an expensive green blazer over a white dress shirt, with the top 2 buttons open, no tie, a thick gold watch on his left wrist that caught the cabin light when he moved. He smelled like bourbon and the particular brand of cologne that announces itself 3 seconds before the person wearing it arrives. He looked at Sarah the way some men look at women, when they believe looking is the same thing as owning. Well, he said, settling in and adjusting his armrest so it encroached slightly into her space. Long flight ahead of us. Sarah nodded once politely and looked forward. You from Dallas? He tried again. Fort Worth, she said, keeping her voice neutral. Fort Worth. He smiled like she'd said something privately amusing. I've got a place in Dallas. The Ritz, you know it? I know of it, she said. Great bar there. You should come sometime. He said it like it was a generous offer, like he was doing her a favor. Sarah said nothing. She turned slightly toward the window and focused on Lily, who had found her coloring book and was working with fierce concentration on a page full of cartoon animals, tongue between her teeth. The flight took off without incident. The skyline of Dallas tilted and disappeared below them as the plane climbed through a layer of thin cloud and leveled out into a broad, pale afternoon sky. Sarah managed to get Lily fully asleep within the first 20 minutes. The coloring book closed, Gerald tucked under her arm, her small head resting in Sarah's lap. Sarah kept one hand lightly on her daughter's back and stared at the seat back screen without really watching anything. She was thinking about her mother, about the last phone call before the hospital, about whether she'd said enough the last time she'd visited. Christmas, 4 months ago, and whether she'd hugged her long enough at the airport when they said goodbye. You never think about whether the hugs were long enough until suddenly they mattered terribly. She felt it before she fully understood what was happening. A hand Heavy, deliberate settling on her shoulder. Not a brush, not an accident. 5 fingers, a slow curl. A squeeze that communicated exactly what it was meant to communicate. I am here. You cannot ignore me. She opened her eyes. The man in the green blazer was leaning toward her. Close enough that she could smell the bourbon more clearly now. He was smiling. That same smile from before, the one that never touched his eyes. You know, he said quietly. His voice low, like they were sharing something private. A woman like you really shouldn't be traveling alone. You need someone looking after you. Sarah moved her shoulder deliberately away. I'm not alone. I'm with my daughter. You know what I mean. His hand came back. I'm just being friendly. Relax. Her heart was hammering. Lily was asleep. The flight attendants were somewhere at the back of the plane. She could feel people in nearby seats. A couple across the aisle. A man with a newspaper 2 rows up but no one was looking directly at her. That particular social blindness that descends on people when they sense a situation they don't want to have to respond to. She kept her voice steady. Please don't touch me. He laughed, a soft, dismissive exhale of air through his nose. Like she'd said something naive, like the rules she was invoking didn't quite apply to him, and his hand came back to her shoulder. Sir. The voice came from directly behind them, low, calm, unhurried, but carrying the kind of quiet, authority that doesn't require volume to dominate. A space. The kind of voice that's been trained, over decades, to be heard clearly in loud and dangerous places. The kind of voice men learn to listen to immediately, even before they know why. Everyone in the surrounding seats heard it. The couple across the aisle looked up. The man with the newspaper stopped turning the page. The man in the green blazer turned around slowly. In seat 19A, directly behind Sarah, sat a man in a United States Air Force dress uniform, dark blue-gray, immaculately pressed without a single wrinkle. Rows of service ribbons and medals arranged in precise columns across his chest, silver pilot wings above them catching the cabin light. On his collar, the silver eagle of a full colonel. His service cap rested on his knee, perfectly squared. He was looking at the man in 18A with an expression that was entirely, almost eerily calm, which, somehow, was more frightening than anger would have been. Take your hand off her, Colonel James Whitfield said. Now. The words landed in the cabin like objects placed on a table. The man in the green blazer blinked. His hand withdrew slowly from Sarah's shoulder, as if it were doing so on its own. Hey, I was just being friendly, I watched what happened, the colonel said. She told you twice to stop. You didn't stop. He paused. You're going to face forward. You're not going to speak to this woman again. You're not going to look at her again. For the rest of this flight. Another pause. Shorter this time. Do you understand what I'm telling you? No one in the surrounding rows was pretending to read or watch anything anymore. The man in the green blazer opened his mouth, closed it, looked around the cabin as if calculating something. Then he faced forward. He didn't say another word. Sarah sat completely still. She became aware gradually that her hands were trembling. She pressed them flat against her knees and focused on breathing. Slow, steady, 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The way she'd learned in a stress management class she'd taken years ago. When her marriage was falling apart, she would not cry on this airplane. She had decided that. Ma'am. She turned. The colonel was leaning slightly forward in his seat, his voice now low enough for just her. Are you all right? Yes, she said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. Thank you, yes, thank you. You handled it correctly, he said quietly. You said no clearly. That matters. She looked at him. She didn't know what to say to that. To being told that she had done the right thing. When the right thing had done nothing until someone else stepped in. I didn't want to wake her, she said, gesturing to Lily. The colonel looked down at the sleeping child. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. Not softness exactly. Recognition, maybe. How old? He asked. 6, Sarah said, and her voice cracked slightly on the word. The way it does when you're holding a lot of things at once, and one small thing finds the seam. He nodded slowly. He didn't ask why her eyes were tired. He He didn't ask where she was going or why she looked like someone carrying something heavier than a carry-on. He just nodded and sat back and remained exactly where he was. Present, watchful, immovable. She would learn his name later. Colonel James Whitfield. United States Air Force, 31 years of service. 2 combat tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. Currently assigned to the Pentagon's Joint Chiefs Staff. She would learn it because Diana, the lead flight attendant who had been watching from the galley, with her hand on the aircraft phone, would quietly ask him for it before they landed. Not for any formal reason, just because she felt the world should know it. For the next 2 hours, the man in 18A sat perfectly still and stared at the seat back screen in front of him. He ordered no more drinks. He reclined his seat exactly the permitted amount, and kept his arms strictly within his own space. He looked like a man sitting inside a room that had gotten much smaller than he expected. When they began their descent into JFK, Diana came and knelt in the aisle beside Sarah's seat. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I saw it start and I was already moving. I should have been faster." "You didn't know how fast it would go," Sarah said. Still, Diana looked at her directly. "You shouldn't have had to wait." She squeezed Sarah's hand once. Then she stood and looked back at Colonel Whitfield. "Sir, is there anything I can get you?" "Anything at all, please." He shook his head once. "I'm fine." "Thank you for your professionalism." Diana nodded. Then she walked toward the front of the plane and picked up the aircraft phone. The man in the green blazer was on his feet the moment the fastened seatbelt sign clicked off, moving fast, head down, cutting into the aisle and pushing toward the front without looking back, like a man who knows an exit when he needs one. He was met at the gate by 2 Port Authority officers and a member of the airline's customer relations team. Sarah was still gathering Lily's things, replacing Gerald in his designated backpack pocket, zipping the coloring books away, finding the 2 remaining juice boxes that had somehow migrated to the bottom of the bag. When she felt someone step into the aisle beside her, she looked up. Colonel Whitfield was standing there, service cap now on perfectly straight, the full authority of his uniform and his 31 years visible in every line of his posture. But his eyes were quiet. "Do you have someone meeting you?" he asked. "My aunt," Sarah said. "She's coming from Queens." Nodded. "Good." He paused for just a moment. "I hope your mother gets better soon." Sarah stared at him. She had not told him about her mother. She had not told him anything. He saw her expression and offered a small, unhurried smile. "You had the look," he said simply, "of someone flying towards something hard." She stood there in the aisle of that plane at JFK, with her backpack and her rolling suitcase and her 6-year-old daughter holding Gerald by one ear, and she felt something crack open quietly in the middle of her chest, not in a bad way, in the way that things crack open when they've been sealed too long. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing that." "Take care of that little girl," he said, and then he moved up the aisle, tall and straight. And the other passengers, without any announcement, without any coordination, simply because of what he looked like and what he had done, stepped back and let him pass. Sarah watched him until he disappeared through the jet bridge door. Lily pulled on her sleeve. She had woken up somewhere over New Jersey and missed every single thing. "Mommy, are we there?" Sarah looked down at her daughter, her small, perfect, entirely unbothered daughter with the rabbit and the coloring books and the whole long life still waiting ahead of her. "Yeah, baby," she said. "We're there." She took Lily's hand and walked off. That plane with her shoulders back and her head high. At the baggage claim, she told her aunt the whole story. Her aunt made her repeat it twice, hands over her mouth. 3 days later, when her mother was stable and speaking, again and asking for bad, hospital coffee and the TV remote, Sarah sat on the edge of her mother's bed and told her too. Her mother listened without interrupting, which, for her mother, was itself remarkable. When Sarah finished, her mother was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the ceiling. Outside the window, New York was doing what New York always does, moving, loud, indifferent, alive. "There are still good people in the world," her mother said finally. Sarah thought about seat 19A, about a man who hadn't been asked, who hadn't hesitated, who had intervened not for recognition or reward but because it was simply Plainly, obviously the right thing to do, and some people still know that, and still do it, without needing to be convinced. Yeah, Sarah said. She reached over and held her mother's hand. There are.